Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma is meant for educational purposes only.
You know, you talk about losing a little bit with reality. And my mission president was taught. We were at a mission conference, and we had gone over there to that conference. Oh, where was I?
Talking about the detachment from reality and your mission president's response.
We're at a mission conference, and I had my talk with the mission conference, and I told him I was feeling awful, and he says, "Is it a woman?" And you know, I had written to a girl while I was in Arizona when we were kicked out of Mexico. I met a really pretty girl there, and I thought, well, I'd sure like to see her when I get home. So I'd written to her, but she didn't want anything to do with it. She never wrote back, obviously. And so that was the only time I'd ever really tried anything like that. And so it wasn't a woman. But I've done some other things, you know. I was a fun missionary, I think. I like to do wild things, you know. But I said no. And if I were doing it now, I would have said, fuck you, no.
Right?
And the only reason I would have done that is that it wasn't a woman. And he didn't have power of discernment. I said no. But the thing was, I was so much pain and so much sorrow and so much nothing that I ached and hurt all over. And if anybody ever tells you that depression doesn't hurt or that breakdown doesn't hurt, they're crazy.
Yeah.
Because
Mason,
it hurt.
Yeah, Mason, you raised your hand in class, Mason. What are some of your thoughts?
Teacher. I'm with a couple of teachers here. I got to get my step in. So as you're talking about these things, there's lots of little messages that are being taught. You know, sometimes we go through mental breakdowns. We certainly all struggle with some mental health issues. But there's this idea, you know, Barry, you said that you decided I just need to work harder. Sarah, you said that I just need to work harder. I think one of the main messages that we get taught is that you just need to work harder, because if you don't, you're just being selfish. So I just kind of wrote down a little circle here of things that go along in there. You know, you work harder, you're tired, so you're told to work harder because obviously you're just tired. You're just being selfish, so you need to work harder. And then that work harder often will lead to the idea that you're the problem. You know, if you're working harder and things still aren't working out, well, then obviously you're thinking about a girl, or obviously you're not bucking up. You're just being lazy. You got to focus outward. You know, in Matthew, Jesus says to find yourself, you have to lose yourself. Right? You have to just give everything. And then at the end of that journey, whenever that's supposed to happen, that's when you'll find yourself. And it's just this beat down yourself until you can't get beat down anymore. So you focus outward, and then you have to re-engage as kind of the next step. You got to just re-engage. Okay, well, let me get over whatever my problems are, and now I'll re-engage. And you get this idea that rest is weakness, right? You can rest when you're dead, or you can rest in heaven. But of course, we know that doesn't happen either, right? Nobody rests in heaven. We're working hard. We're busy.
Yeah, who never want to go to the Mormon heaven?
You know? Right.
Not me.
Well, maybe some men, because you know there'll be lots of righteous women around, and we'll just get to scoop them right up. But just this cycle of you can't rest, you're always working.
Yeah. Well, let me go on with what I was going to say. You're right, and that's what happened. So what I didn't tell my mission president that as I had come to the conclusion, I had about a year before, I had been reading in the Journal of Discourses while on my mission, and I read a section by Brigham Young wherein he told the saints he was talking to that the dominions of the devil are constantly surrounding us, and they're just waiting for us to let our guard down. Well, it didn't bother me too much at that time because I'd heard that story before. You know, all Mormons heard that story. We're constantly, legions of the devil are constantly surrounding us, just waiting for us to let down our guard. Right. But when I got sick, I thought, have I let down my guard? Have I done something so evil that the Lord has handed me off to the buffetings of Satan?
You're
Yeah.
always the problem.
And I blamed myself. And I was so ashamed. The worst thing from my experience on the mission was the shame that it left me. I was so ashamed that I talk about losing touch with reality. And you said it a little bit differently. Uh, but the fact was, I had lost that touch with reality. You know, when I started getting better about 7 or 8 years later, I realized I lost that touch with reality. And but the fact is I thought, well, the Lord has handed me off to the buffetings of Satan. And if that's the case, I'm the zone leader here. I once had been the traveling elder and all of that kind of stuff, and I had some important positions. How do I tell that to anybody? I never told a missionary. I never told my mother. Because I had to go home for 3 weeks to find out what's wrong with me. They found nothing physically wrong and sent me back. I went back and I felt just as bad as before I'd left. And I went home, and the rest of my mission, I came back, and the rest of my mission was really hard. What I kept doing to show that I was good, Mason, is I kept working harder. And by the time my mission was over, I came home a depleted, fatigued, anxious, ashamed little piece of myself, of the guy that had left on his mission.
And
Yeah.
that's
And,
a badge of honor. That's a
and it,
badge of We want you
yeah,
to come home from your mission feeling like you could not possibly have given one more ounce of yourself,
Yeah.
regardless of what state you come home in. You know, some people will come home just tired, others will come home beat. And
I
it's a
came
badge
home
of honor.
beat. And when it wasn't until about 30 years after I'd come home, uh, I was talking with, I finally, I didn't go get mental health because I was afraid I might embarrass the church. I don't know if you've ever heard that before, but that was my
Mm-hmm.
fear. And so then I got a divorce. I'd been married for almost 10 years, had 2 children, uh, and it was a very unhappy divorce and all of that kind of stuff like that. And I was sick. And I said, I need help. And I finally started getting some mental help. And
Yeah.
at first I didn't get the best kind of people, but you have to kind of work around to find who you need as a counselor. And so I found this guy over in Flagstaff, and he'd worked a lot with the Flagstaff Police Department. And and one day he and I were talking. He said, Barry, I think what happened to you that day on your mission uh, was a cause of PTSD. And I'm sure that you have PTSD. I said, what? And I had read about it because all these guys from Vietnam coming home. And and I said, what? He said, yeah. And he said that because I was near death, I was scared to death. You know, I was trying to save my life from me, and I was trying to work, and and that was the first time I'd ever heard of me having PTSD. So as of today, I've had PTSD about 62 years of my life, or at least 61 years of my life,
Yeah.
and and I still get it, and I still once in a while have little triggers that turn that stuff on, and I'm not so bad now. Recently, my psychiatrist decided to retire at 63 or 64. And she said, Barry, you're going to have to find another psychiatrist because I'm going to retire. But she had now had the right, uh, politically, legally, to tell me something. She said, I want to tell you, Barry. She said, I think the best thing you ever did for your mental health was leave your church.
Yeah. That definitely resonates for me. Absolutely. I think that some of the commonalities that I'm seeing in your story that I've heard from some of my ex-Mormon clients and definitely what I experienced myself is blaming myself for my mental state, feeling broken, feeling like I was never good enough, even though I was literally dedicating every second, every free moment to something having to do with the church. I put the church above my family. I put it above my kids. I put it above my career and my education. I mean, the church came first, and then not having anybody to talk to. One of the benefits that I had is that I was pursuing a degree in mental health, looking for answers for our son, Brig, who has pediatric onset schizophrenia. He was diagnosed with psychosis for the first time right before his fifth birthday. So he was 4 and had been struggling for quite some time. So he got the official diagnosis at Phoenix Children's Hospital, and he turned 5 in the hospital. So I went into mental health and behavioral health because the doctors kept blaming me for his behavioral problems, which a lot of doctors do that. And schizophrenia is so incredibly rare, especially diagnosed that early in life. And Brig just got the shit end of the gene pool. But in your day, Kimball and Packer, they were telling people that psychologists and mental health professionals were influenced by the devil. And if you went and talked to them, you were opening yourself up to really bad things because we could manipulate your brain. And I kind of chuckle at that because I like to call my degree, I have a master's degree in ethical manipulation. And whatnot. So I mean, I understand the concern, but most people in my field, our goal is to help people see things differently so that they can heal, so that they can make connections between past harms and traumas. Because once the brain gets it, once it clicks, and that's my professional clinical term, it clicks. We have the capacity. We have the capacity to get better.
And that happened to me.
Yeah. So how did you do that? How did you get better?
Well, it took I got home from my mission. I was 22 and a half or 22, somewhere in there. And so for the next 30 to 40 years, I was sicker than a dog. And there'd be times when I'd be perfectly lucid, perfectly fine, but I was always waiting for the other shoe to drop. I don't know if you've ever heard that feeling, but I was always
scarcity brain. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so when I got home, I worked hard to become a student. Oh, I was going to tell you something. And while I was home, I thought, since I was a responsibility, I kept fasting and praying and hoping and stuff like that, and nothing ever worked.
Yeah, but what your body needed was nutrition and hydration and sleep.
And I became the kind of Mormon that my first experience was going to the temple before my mission. My dad had died, and that was a trauma I hadn't dealt with. And so by the time I got sick on my mission, I'm sure that was another part of all of this pressure that was on me. My dad had died, and my mother was working, and so I went to the temple by myself. And I got into the temple, and at the time I went to the temple, they didn't have the movies. They were doing it in plays where men and women were playing the parts. And then they had all these symbols of masonry. And I knew what masonry was because my brother, my 3-year older brother, wore a Masonic ring, and he'd leave it around sometimes. And anything he wore, I'd steal. And so I was wearing his ring around one day, and some guy saw it, and he said, "Are you a Mason?" I said, "No." And he said, "I'm going to beat the shit out of you." And he scared the hell out of me. He was because I was wearing a Masonic ring, and I was weaselly enough to get out of it, like, "Oh, please no," And I'd just gotten out of the hospital, and my chest had been I'd had surgery on my whole chest, and so if he'd hit me in the chest, he probably would have just crashed in all my ribs again.
And I'm sure you didn't know that you're not allowed to wear Mason symbols unless you are.
I had nothing to do with that. Those damn Masons. There's even a Mason Westbrook, if you've ever heard him. But anyway.
Yeah. But he's cute, too.
Yeah, I always said he was.
Yeah.
But I never got the joy to go up and say, "Hey, you're cute." But
you should try it sometime, Barry.
I still can't do it. But but the fact was is I saw all those Masonic symbols. And I had heard a little scuttlebutt here and there uh, about Masons in the church, but I didn't know very much about it at all. And that bothered me. And then and in those days, I had to wear those old temple garments that were you put on, and there was no crotch. And man, I had to sit there with my stuff hanging out, rubbing against my trousers because there was no crotch, and it felt creepy. And also they were when they were washing and anointing, they'd put their finger in some oil and they'd put it on my head, my ears, and then they'd and they'd put it on my stomach, and they had to reach under. I was naked underneath this kind of a poncho made out of a sheet or something. God, that felt awful and weird.
Mm-hmm.
And the ceremony felt weird. And so my first experience with the temple was, it had nothing to feel like my primary teachers and Sunday school teachers had promised. Nothing wonderful happened there. So I didn't, as a result, I never really liked going to the temple. I would go. I even learned the ceremony. I would go, but I never really liked it. But it was also cool in Phoenix when I got home from my mission. The temple was a kind of nice place to go when not many people had refrigeration. And so, but so I didn't like the temple, and I did my home teaching. Didn't like it very much. I took all of my assignments. I was even a counselor in the bishopric. Didn't like that very much, you know. And I had my stake president. I was 29 years old, and I'd come home from my Spanish graduate school, and I got a job at Superior, Arizona, teaching Spanish. And the stake president came up one day. My bishop had said, "I want you to be my counselor." I said, "I don't want to be your counselor." But the stake president showed up, and he talked to me, and he said, "So are you gay?"
Wow.
Because I was 29. I was 29 years old, or maybe 30, and I hadn't been married. And I said, "No, I don't think so." But
What an
I had
assumption.
depression, and one thing with depression, Sarah, is if the most beautiful girl in the world had walked into my office naked and said, "Hi, Professor Richins," I'd look up and I'd say, "Oh, I think you got spinach on your tooth."
Yeah.
You know,
Right, because everything, right,
That's
all
what I
of
would've
your
said.
emotions, all of your body changes, and it's very common when you're significantly depressed to have no sexual arousal. That's one of the symptoms of depression.
And so that was nice for my psyche. Well, am I gay? You know, because I had been going through some terrible depression that year, and I was teaching a night class, and there's some beautiful girls down at Central Arizona College, and some beautiful girls in that class, and I'm going, are they beautiful? Are they cute? I couldn't feel anything. There was no sexual attraction, and so I wondered, could I be gay? Am I, am I, what did they call it? When you don't know if you are or not. And I thought, no.
Asexual.
Yeah, I didn't know and yet one day I was checking I was over at ASU library or bookstore, and I read a book on gayness. And I was just slipping through it there. And it said one thing that we know about gay men, is that generally gay men aren't too attracted to breasts. And I thought, God, I love breasts. And all of a sudden I went, hallelujah.
I'm not gay.
Yeah. But, and I don't know if you can see it. I don't know where, if I can get it up there, but right there on my finger, I wear this little ring because I've had students come out to me in college classes, and I thought, I don't have a gay child, but my cousin does.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a couple of cousins who are gay. And I said, I don't know what is going on here, but I'm going to be your ally. And I just said, the only way I can do that, I'll buy this little ring. But so as I went through my deconstruction, and it was long, my testimony died as a series of about 100 or 1,000 paper cuts until one day it crashed. But I didn't like so many things about the church, and I'd go to church, and sometimes I'd come home, and I felt worse when I got home than before I'd gone because of the messages I'd gotten at church. And of course, with my mind, I can aggrandize anything, I can catastrophize anything, and so I'd already given up the fact that I could even go to any of the celestial kingdoms. I just wasn't worthy. I didn't want to go to the other world, and I certainly didn't want to be married to a bunch of women, you know,
Yeah.
and I didn't. And so that was just how it is. So Mason, my testimony died bit by bit by bit by bit, and I wouldn't look at anything. And one day, my cousin, who's a super believer, sent me a little something on the net. And I used a computer in my office all the time, but I never went on the net. I'd never been on the net. I didn't know anything about the web, you know. And but I had spent a great deal of my time in Europe among the Roman civilization, and I'd spent a great deal of my time in Mexico and Central, Mesoamerica, with the native
The Aztec and the Mayan and Incans.
and so I'd probably been to almost every major archaeological site in Mexico. Plus, I went to graduate school in the Midwest, so I'd been around where the Hopewell people had been, with the mounds and stuff. But I kept holding on, and I married a girl after a divorce. I was married. I was single for about 3 or 4 years, and I said, I gotta take care of me. I got to get myself healthy. I don't want to take all of the shit I took into my first marriage. My first wife and I were both, I thought, messed up.
Mm.
And two unhealthy minds doesn't make a healthy mind
No.
when you come together. And so I was just trying to hold on and stay. But this place where I went on the computer, he had told me about a cute little story, a faith promoting story, and I read it, and But I noticed in another place where it talked about two boys talking to an archaeologist, and I don't know if they were Mormon boys or not, or missionaries or whatever. I just remember. So I clicked up there, and they said, "What can you tell us about the Book of Mormon?" And he says, "Has anybody ever found anything in or on the earth that is evidence of the existence of the Book of Mormon?" And my mind went, no, no. And within 30 seconds, my testimony died like that.
Yeah.
But it took me 75 years, Mason. I'm not, what are you now, 45, 46?
46. Yeah.
Yeah, you're my son's age. And I lost a lot of life, and I've kind of felt bad about that. But on the other hand, we don't choose life. And we don't choose what happens to us. I do not believe that things happen for a reason.
Right.
And so when we know more, we do better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And finally, one day, when I was 75, I left the church, and I'd left my college profession, and I was able to stay 10 years longer, so I didn't retire until I was 75 years old. And that was about the same time I lost my testimony, or I never lost my testimony. That was finally when I found reason. And,
Yeah.
and I could listen to myself. I couldn't hear a damn thing until I was ready. And I bet that happened to you, Mason. You probably heard all
Oh,
kinds
yeah.
of stuff, and you couldn't even hear it.
Well, mine sounded like a really cute little woman that I really needed to listen to and didn't want to. But yeah, I mean, you don't. I think of my family members, right? Like they don't want to hear, and I've gone from the point where I really, really wanted to shout the problems at them to
Been
where
there.
I am now. I'm just like, you know what? I hope that someday they have the idea to listen. I hope that they don't get too hurt in the process, because I
Mm-hmm.
know lots of people who go through Mormonism and never feel, and probably never really are unhealthy. I was one of those people. And so I just kind of hope
When
that
I
that's
read
the
the
case
book,
for
I
them.
was amazed. I thought, who in the hell is this guy? I
Yeah.
was amazed. I said, I could have never done any of the shit you did, And and yet, my wife is very sick. I take care of her, uh,
Yeah.
and I love her, and I do that because I love her.
Yeah.
I told her when I left, she said, "Barry, how did you break our temple covenant?" And I said, "Honey, I can't have a covenant with someone I don't believe exists."
Yeah.
But I said,
It's
"I love you, and you are very important to me. And I did make a covenant with you for better or worse." And I said, I'll be here because I love her.
it's
But
interesting to me because we've talked about this on the podcast before too. It's interesting to me how many people walk away from Mormonism and are not able to hang on to any kind of belief in the divine. Because when you start just deconstructing, for instance, the Book of Mormon, yeah, I'm kind of in the same place.
oh,
When you start deconstructing the Book of Mormon and realize then that there's also similar problems with the Bible, the whole floor comes out from underneath you because you can't trust anything that you thought you knew, and now you can't really trust what everyone says is of divine origin. It's really hard to hang on to anything that is of divine nature.
Hey, head on over to Amazon and buy your copy of Trauma Bonded, a true story of navigating attachments forged in complex PTSD by me, Sarah Westbrook.
Chicken tacos should only be trusted to chicken professionals. That's where we come in. Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One comes with pico de gallo and creamy chipotle ranch. And the other comes with bacon, lettuce, tomato, and avocado ranch. Chicken experts since 1990. Chicken taco experts since now. Order yours today in the Zax Rewards app. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
The mighty and resilient Merrimack River, carving through the communities of our great region. My name is Linda Lorden, proud president of Merrimack County Savings Bank. And like the river that serves as our namesake, we're a constant yet ever-changing presence. Because to us, it's bigger than banking. It's about powering communities and putting people first. It's about knowing where you came from and where you're going. That's Merrimack style. Visit us at themerrimack.com.
And it's interesting.
Are you reading my mind? That's exactly what happened,
Yeah.
my friend. It's very interesting, isn't it? That's exactly what happened. The only thing I can tell you is, Mason, think of how long you couldn't let anything through, and realize that your parents haven't even heard this shit. Excuse me, this stuff. I'm
No,
sorry.
you're welcome to swear away. Unpacking Mormonism is rated mature on purpose because Sarah drops the F-bomb a
Because
lot.
Sarah can't control herself, so this is a mature program.
I can control myself. I choose not to.
I've known for years that she was kind of a little shit.
She
But,
really is. She really
But you
is.
know what? Also, I knew that Sarah was a whole hell of a lot like I was when she was a kid. And geez, I knew Sarah. I could have been her alter ego.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the fact was is that you did sound like me. But the fact was is, remember, I didn't walk away until I was 70, and I was the instructor in the high priest quorum. But I knew that the paper cuts were overwhelming me. And when I read that thing where that guy says, "Has anybody ever seen any evidence in or on or around the world of the evidence of the Book of Mormon?" And I've been all those places, remember? And I said, no.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it was like, shh. Now, let me ask you a question here, Mason. Did you have a feeling like someone had taken chains off of you after a while, and that you felt actually physically lighter?
So Sarah and I actually had this conversation yesterday because she had said that was kind of the case for me. It really wasn't for me. I remember that being the case for Sarah when she walked away like all of the truth claims and all that stuff almost was permission for her to walk away because she was already wanting to be gone.
Me
For
too.
me, I didn't have that experience. I didn't have an unhealthy experience with the church. At least not, it didn't feel that way.
And
Um,
I've tried not to.
right. And I didn't realize how much the church had affected my family in an unhealthy way, but it didn't really affect me in an unhealthy way until I recognized how much it had affected the family. Now, the relief she said that I had felt really came when I finally made the decision, because I was kind of vacillating one way or the other. What do I do? And when I finally was okay making the decision, this just isn't what I thought it was. It's just not what I thought it was. Even if maybe there's some truth stuff in there that I haven't sorted through, it's not what I thought it was. And so I am walking away. When I made that decision, there was a lot of peace that went along with that.
Well, what's good about Mormonism is not unusual. It's generally good
Yes.
about any other religion.
Yeah.
But what's bad about Mormonism is really fucking weird.
Yeah, it really is. I know
Yes,
that.
it is.
Yes, it is. I know that for me, my journey out had to do with, I'd had some really difficult challenges with infertility, and then we lost our twins despite praying, and I was angry at
Of
the
course,
Mormon
it's your
God.
fault. It's all your fault. Didn't you feel like what have I done?
Yeah.
Not at that point in my life. When we lost our twins, it was an adoption. And they were born premature, and I had them in the NICU for 6 days, and the biological father refused to sign the adoption papers because my microphone keeps going out today. He refused to sign the adoption paperwork because he wanted to get paid $10,000 per child. And that's called human trafficking. It's a federal offense. And so when I said, I can't pay you, that's illegal, like we could both go to jail and whatnot, then he withdrew his consent for the adoption.
Oh,
And
I thought it was a baby that was born from your womb.
no,
Mhm.
no. So, but we had known about the adoption for a while. Like those girls were as much mine as if they had been born. And that's kind of how I am with kids. If you're coming to me, I will love you with everything in my soul as if you came out of me. That's how it's always been. That's probably why we we collect children as we go through life.
I can vouch for that.
I've often wondered if I could love my children anymore if they'd come out of the womb of their mother, of my wife, because I don't know that I don't know. All I know is that I love my children so much that I could have killed for them.
Yeah. Well, and I can speak, and Mason can speak, and I'll let him speak for himself, but we have biological children. We have 3. I got pregnant 11 times and miscarried 8 times, and we have 3 babies that
Did
are
you
ours
beat
biologically. And I love them the same. The
But
bond came differently, but once it was established, it's the same for me.
did you beat yourself up for a while over the ones that weren't born alive?
No, I think because of our medical background, especially Mason's medical background, I understood that it was not my fault. I understood that there were medical complications that I could not control. So I had to take medicine to get pregnant. Then I had to take medicine to stay pregnant. And then at the end, I had to have medical intervention in order to deliver safely. So I was a high-risk
That's
pregnancy.
terrible that it happened, but what a blessing! At least God, knowledge is weightlifting. I mean, knowledge lifts
Yeah.
fear.
Yeah. But with the
Yeah,
loss
it
of our
really does.
twins, I was in Pennsylvania. I was in Pittsburgh with the twins. We were in a hospital in Pittsburgh, and our attorney had told us if Mom had gone to New Jersey to have the babies, then we'd have been able to terminate birth dad's rights because of him trying to buy them. But in Pennsylvania, his rights were very, very protected. And so there was no way for us to pull those babies out. And Dad wasn't planning on raising them. He didn't want to raise them. He was going to give them to somebody else to raise. And so I remember riding the train from the hospital back to where I was staying. And I prayed, and I want to say that Elder Holland or somebody had talked about praying to all of your ancestors or enlisting the support of your ancestors while you're praying or something. And so I was like, hey, family, we need your help because these girls will be 100% better off in the Westbrook home than they will with either birth parent or anybody that they're trying to give these babies to. And the answer to that prayer was no. I went home empty-handed, and the girls went into foster system. So instead of coming home to a permanent home, they became wards of the state. And unfortunately, 4 years later, one of them was murdered by birth mom's boyfriend. So, I mean, it's just this horrific thing. And so Mason and I grieved differently, but it was at that point that I was also starting my practicum in my master's degree. So I was providing clinical services as a counselor under the supervision of somebody that was licensed to supervise me. And one of the things that I started noticing is, in my practicum, I didn't see a lot of LDS clients. I saw a couple, but I didn't see very many of them. But then when I finished my practicum hours, at that point, Mason and I were in Killeen, Texas, and I went into private practice for myself. I let the bishops know, hey, I'm here, I'm LDS, I'm licensed, and there isn't a LDS social services building anywhere near us. And so I got hundreds of referrals. I couldn't even take all of the LDS referrals. And I got really scared because I knew that if I messed up and word got out within the Mormon community that I wasn't competent or something, I would lose my entire business. Like my business was dependent at that time on LDS clients. But what happened was in my practicum, my clients would get better. And then when I was in my private practice, my LDS clients could not progress past the first 6 weeks of counseling. And so what I began to see was my LDS clients lacked flexible thinking. They lacked the ability to take in new data and respond or think differently about it. And I wasn't giving them anything that would have been opposed to Mormonism, but it was a skill that they lacked. And my theory is because they had never been exposed to it. And so by the time I had my nervous breakdown and everything, I was pleading at this point, God, please give me a near-death experience because I need to walk with Jesus and I want to ask him, is Mormonism actually the true church? Because if it is, then I will continue to burn myself out to be where I'm supposed to be.
That's pretty damn sick,
I was sick. I was really sick. And one morning, I mean, I was praying for it. I was praying and pleading with God, please, just take me. I don't want to die. I'm not suicidal, but I want a near-death experience because I need to walk with Jesus and ask him these questions. Like, I just need to know. And I know that that's a sure knowledge of things, but Jesus, you know me well enough to know that if I get that, I'm going to stick with it forever. Like that's just who I am. That's just who Sarah is. And so what ends up happening is I'm separated from Mason again because of military stuff. So I'm now in Missouri and Mason is in Killeen, Texas, and I'm driving to work and I've got a huge patient load. Gratefully, when I left Killeen and opened my practice in Missouri, I no longer had a full LDS clientele anymore. I was seeing people from many denominations and many walks of life, and my clients were getting better again. Like the non-LDS clients got better. My LDS clients seemed to stall out no matter what I did. And so I was driving to work. It was a heavy patient load. I was exhausted and I felt the urge. It was snowy and icy. It was a January. And I felt the urge to just jerk the wheel, knowing that the ice would do the rest. And we have these great big, the cliffs, the mountain has been cut out. We're in the Ozark Mountains. And so the mountain has been.
I know what it looks like there.
Yeah, it's been blasted. And so on either side of me is the cliff face of rock wall. And, I know if I jerk my wheel, I'm going to run my 4Runner, my Toyota 4Runner will ram into that wall and I can finally rest. And it wasn't that I wanted to die as much as I just wanted to rest. I just wanted to rest. So I pulled over, started doing my counselor stuff. I rolled down the passenger window and threw my keys out the window because it was a push start car. So if my keys are over there, my car will not start. And then I called a good friend of mine, and I called Mason. And once I'd calmed down enough, I had to get out in the snow and find my keys. And then I drove to my office, and then I had an ambulance come. I think I had an ambulance come pick me up, Mace. I don't remember
I don't remember.
sure or whatever, but I ended up going inpatient. And as I laid in that inpatient hospital, I was like, okay, God, something's got to come off my plate. I'm dying of overwhelm here. What can come off my plate? And I can't get rid of my special needs kids. That's not an option. At this point, I have 3 of them. I've got 1 with schizophrenia and 2 with autism. And so I can't give up my kids. That's not an option. And I can't give up my work because my work is what breathes life into me. I can't give up my work. I'm not going to give up my husband or my family. The only other thing that was optional was the church. And so I said, okay, I'm going to step down from the church. And at that point for me, it wasn't, I don't believe it was, I just need a break. So I'm just going to take a couple of months off of church. And so I asked to be released for my callings. I told Mason, I was like, hey, I'm stepping back. Gratefully, COVID happened shortly thereafter. And so stepping back became very easy because nobody went to church anymore for a little while there. And I then had a client that came to me, and they were a mixed faith family. And the man was a believer and the female wasn't. And she was very skeptical of entering a counseling relationship with me because I was LDS. And I told her, I said, look, I will read whatever you have. I will consider it. We're not going to really go into church stuff. We're going to be working on your communication patterns, processing your emotions. And she said, you need to be tested. And she said, I want you to, read something, and I want to hear your response to it before I'm willing to engage in counseling. And I said, look, I can only give you about 3 hours a week because at this point, I can't read. I cannot absorb what I'm reading because of the nervous breakdown. Like my cognitive awareness was gone. I was only able to really work a half day before I was just brain dead. I was really struggling. And what she gave me was the CES letter. And the only thing I read that I actually comprehended for the first year after my nervous breakdown was the CES letter. And I took that CES letter and I followed multiple of the sources, almost all of them, of the citations, and chased them back down to their original source in order for me to verify if Jeremy Reynolds was an accurate, healthy researcher that was reporting. I mean, I use the scientific method the same I would for anything at work. And for me, the CES letter was a permission slip to be able to say, hey, it's not true. You were right. You've been right for a really long time. So you can let go of it. And I never looked back.
I'd had many of those feelings that Jeremy had talked about.
Yeah.
But Jeremy was one of those guys who took them all those thousands of cuts, and put them in one package. And that was what Jeremy did for me. Is I said, damn, I had that thought. I've had that. But all of a sudden he put them in there, and I start to see the pattern. And I couldn't do that for so many years. I stopped you now. Keep going, my friend.
No, so for me, my healing, one of the things that was really fascinating for me was, I went to Mason, and, I told him, I said, hey, this is what's going on, and here's a copy of the CES letter, because I know that Mason is more analytical. He's not seeing the same things that I'd been seeing in clinic. And I think Mason were you still the bishop? No, you weren't the bishop at that time. You were with us anyway.
I don't think so, yeah.
Yeah.
He just couldn't. I couldn't. Look, I'm 82 years old. I've been out of the church 7 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I
It's
gave
just
that.
not safe. It's not safe for you to even look at that stuff because your eternal salvation is in the balance.
That's
and
a
that's
nine.
the way the church wants it.
As we say in Germany, that's a nine Scheisser, my boy.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I gave that to Mason. And even though I threw our marriage into a difficult place, because I was non-believing and Mason was, and any conversation that we had that was serious somehow would circle back to the church. And Mason was really struggling with the backfire effect. Anytime I brought anything up, he would get angry. He started to tell me I couldn't teach our kids in family home evening. And I was like, look, I can still teach the kids to be honest, and we can talk to them about integrity, and we can talk to them about health and wellness, and it doesn't have to come back to the church. And there was a lot of dissonance there for Mason. And despite all of that, I was happier than I had been in years. And I think that one of the things that really opened Mason's eyes was the time that I said, Mason, I need you to understand where I was at mentally. Where I was at mentally was I knew that if I left the church, the chances of you and I getting divorced were very, very high. And my choice was not marriage or church. My choice was continue to live or give up the church. Because when I was trying to do what the church was asking me to, I wanted to harm myself. And I'd had at that point I had the one major breakthrough, the nervous break, and then I'd had another really bad episode at another time. And I was like, my choices were stay in the church and die from suicide and put my kids through that hell. And I know what that hell looks like because I've counseled several individuals whose parents or siblings have died by suicide, or leave the church, possibly get divorced, and be alive for my kids. I said it would be better for our kids to be raised by divorced parents than by you alone because I died by suicide. I said that's what's better for my kids, and that's why I made that choice. So Barry, you had your hand raised. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, I've been there, and I was just kind of like with that guy in Come Back or Welcome Back Carter, Vinny, when he go, ooh, 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 ooh. Remember,
Me too. Yeah.
Anyway, you used the word integrity, and that was really one of the reasons I left. And I didn't even tell my wife I was leaving. I just sent a letter and said I was gone. But from the church. But the fact is it was my integrity. I could no longer. The dissonance was affecting my integrity.
Yeah.
And here I am. I'm a college professor. I'm teaching in my World Lit class. I'm teaching sections on the Old and New Testament. And I felt like to be a good teacher, I needed to know the Old and New Testament. So I read many, many, many university level books, and even university level introduction to the New Testament, introduction to the Old Testament, even those kind of things, course stuff from Yale and North Carolina and stuff like that. And so I was leaving. I mean, I was gone. But the fact was, if any of you have ever read Dan Barker's Godless, or he did another one, God, the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Look him up.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up. That sounds good, Mason. Make sure you get the links for that, because that sounds like something Sarah would enjoy reading.
He and his wife are the presidents of the Freedom from Religion Foundation up there in Wisconsin. But anyway, if anybody ever wanted to understand, who's not a Mormon, wanted to understand how I felt about leaving my church, Dan Barker was a kind of a fundamentalist minister, Protestant minister, and he just started waking up, and that was his whole profession, and he talks about all of that stuff. But there comes a time when you have to be able to live with yourself.
Yeah.
And to do that, you have to be willing to push past what other people want you to think or do.
Yeah.
And so I told Barbara, I said, honey, the only way I could justify leaving the church was I felt I was losing my integrity, and I didn't think I could do that anymore.
Yeah, for me as a mental health professional, I felt like I was a hypocrite in the sense of I'm teaching my clients.
Integrity.
Yeah. Well, and I'm telling my clients, trust your gut and, listen to your body and what is your body trying to tell you, and the mind-body connection. And I'm telling them to live authentically to themselves. And I'm saying, if you're miserable, if you're depressed, what's going on. Let's get curious about that. But then for myself, I would thought stop when it came to the church because I'd been trained to thought stop. It was so ingrained in me that I didn't even, I'm teaching. So this is kind of my cute little meme here. My daughter wants to watch SpongeBob to learn how to tie her shoes. And so I'm going to watch SpongeBob or look at SpongeBob memes here so I can understand myself better. But, I'm telling my clients, my friends, how to take care of themselves, how to process difficult things, how to challenge thought stopping, how to work through thought distortions. And then here I am with my own mental health, not practicing what I preach.
You
And
were in denial.
I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. So for those who are just listening, we've got a picture of SpongeBob yelling at the octopus guy. I don't even know these characters because we don't watch SpongeBob at my house. Not for anything against SpongeBob. My kids talk about wanting to watch SpongeBob and then they never do. But this says me telling my friends mental health is important and they should take care of themselves. And like SpongeBob is screaming at this guy. And I'm like, oh yeah, Sarah's definitely been there. Sarah's definitely gotten a little too intense about mental wellness in the past. And then how I deal with my own mental health. And I'm alone. And there's, for me, that would be a cup of hot chocolate. Definitely not coffee. Because I was a good Mormon girl, but not addressing my own weaknesses. And once I left the Mormon church and discovered just how dishonest Joseph Smith was, that was huge for me. And like you, Barry, the first time in the temple, it really bothered me because I had been conditioned from the time I was little. Nobody's supposed to touch you under your clothes unless you're married to them. And then I go to the temple, and they've changed it now, actually. They no longer do it that way. But then I'm in the temple, and they're putting oil as close to my pubic bone and blessing my loins. It was creepy. And it was, old women touching me, and I didn't like it. It felt like grooming. It really felt like grooming.
Yeah, it was really creepy, wasn't it?
So creepy. And I mean, that was traumatizing for me because of my childhood. I'm walking around like, all my life I've been told don't let anybody do that. Then I go to the temple and it's supposed to be this amazing thing. And all of a sudden I'm being touched in places by people I don't know with oil, and I'm slimy and I'm greasy. And when they help you climb into the garment, they're getting flashes of your naked body. And I'm like, this feels like I've just broken the law of chastity in the temple. Like I feel like I need to go to my bishop and talk about this. And I never did, because why would you? The temple's supposed to be special. But yeah, as I walked away and was able to really tune in with who I was, and then finally speak up about who I was and what I had been through, the healing just started to come naturally. And like you, Barry, I have complex PTSD, which you can read about in my book. Barry read my book. Barry came to my book signing in Arizona. He drove all the way down to come see me with his beautiful granddaughter.
Miles, Mason, and I only had to stop to pee 3 times. That's how long a trip it was from Holbrook to Snowflake.
That's funny. So,
that's every 10 minutes, man. That's good time right there.
Yeah.
Well, thank goodness for that mountain range in between.
Yeah, true. So anyway, but as I wrote the book, I mean, I had to get to a place where I felt healed enough to write the book so I could revisit those moments. But my goal was, and my motto that I live by now is, be honest and have courage, because there is nothing worth hiding from the people that I love. And the more honest I am, the more Mason has the capacity to understand me at my core, and the more I have the capacity to understand myself at my core. And then things just got better. It was like this. It was the natural byproduct of living authentically. Was I got better.
Let me tell you a story about my first wife. She was one of those people who wouldn't talk to me if she got angry. And so I never got used to, but had to get used to the silent treatment.
Stonewalling.
And one day I finally said, "What's wrong, honey?" And she said, "You know." I said, "No, I don't know." "You should know." I said, "Just tell me and I'll take care of it." She said, No, if I had to tell you that, it would spoil it. And I'm going to tell you right now, the little I do know about women is that sometimes we men believe women know more about life than we do, more about sex than we do, more about relationships than we do. And then I meet a girl who's scared to death of me because she's trying to please me because she thinks I know so much. And here we are, two ignoramuses trying to make something out of a life. And the fact is we've got to talk and we've got to say things.
Yeah.
It is so important. Talking about teaching yourself. What was it? Oh, physician, heal thyself.
Yeah.
I remember I was teaching some world lit classes and argumentation classes, and I'd tell my students, you've got to judge the evidence. Any argument you write for me in this class, if you can't prove it with the evidence from the material you've been reading, I'm not going to accept your paper. It will not be an argumentation paper. And I said, you've got to do the research and you've got to be honest. And I wasn't.
Yeah.
I wasn't looking into Mormonism. I kept thinking I should. I didn't even know where to look. I had no idea where to find books like that. I had no idea where to find anything on the online. I'd never been there.
Yeah.
But
and I think the church counts on that because they tell you can't read it. Like, don't read it. It's dangerous. It's anti, unless it's published by us. And both Mason and I are in the medical field where we've, been taught the scientific process. We depend on it for our practice. And the church got an exception to the rule. Like nothing else in our lives got the exception to the rule, but the church did.
Let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One with pico and creamy chipotle ranch, and the other with bacon and avocado ranch. Chicken expert since 1990. Taco expert since now. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
In every part of my life, except my church life, I was an empiricist. Yeah. I was going to tell you what, Nathan, you were talking earlier about not having those babies come home. My second child, my first child I adopted out of Phoenix, and I got him after 3 days after he was born. And my second child was mine the day she was born on the papers, but I didn't get to see her for 3 months. And so I was going through a go-between, an American woman, and who would help me. So finally, after 3 months and $900 of babysitting fees, I finally picked up my little daughter. And I loved her. And in time, I loved her more and more and more. And about 4 or 5 years later, this lady that had helped me with the adoption, the go-between, had got in sideways with some scoundrels. And they were scamming some people. And the FBI was on it. And I was at work, and an FBI man came to my house and talked to my first wife. And they said they wanted to talk about my daughter's name is Lori. And she was about 4 or 5 at that time. And so she must have been at school too. I don't know now. But anyway, they said, Mrs. Richins, if all of these things that you've done to get this adoption through, if there's any illegality anywhere, the baby's gone. Your daughter's gone. 5 years old. My heart was there. I got home and my wife told me that. And that's one of the few times in my life my knees turned to rubber. I just about fell straight to the floor.
Yeah.
And I made a decision right there. If I ever knew ahead of time they were coming, I would pick up that baby and run.
Yeah.
I had no place to go. I could not have gone any place. But the fact was, that's how much I loved that girl and how much we learn to love people and how scary it is to see one of them hurt.
Right.
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead, Mace.
I think that as we come to the close of this, I think what we really are seeing here is that when we can't talk about things in a real, open, and vulnerable way, we get hurt. Whether it be in a marriage where you can't talk as a husband and wife, whether it be as a parent where you can't talk to your child or that child can't talk to their parent, or in an organization like a church, like a high demand religion or any religious organization, if you can't talk about the struggles, it's an unhealthy relationship. And
Yeah.
people are going to get hurt. Some people are going to be able to put things on the shelf, and that shelf will last their whole life. And other people are going to put one or two things on that shelf and it's going to collapse on them because everybody handles it differently. But ultimately, if we can't talk about what we're struggling with, it will eat us up inside. And we will see not just mental health effects, but we'll see physical health effects. And that really is what this is all about. I mean, I am blessed at this moment to be able to talk to two people who have had a nervous breakdown and very specifically related to an organization that was hurting them and maybe didn't even realize at
Oh,
the
I
time
didn't.
that that is what was going on. But as they were able to look at things, they're like, you know what? This is the problem. This is the relationship. And some people will hear this podcast and be like, yeah, no, whatever. And other people will be like, that resounds so much with me because we have to be able to talk about it if we're going to work through it. Whether you talk about it and you stay healthy in that organization, or you talk about it and you get healthy by getting out of that organization. Either way, the issues have to be talked about. They have to be managed and dealt with and acknowledged in order for us to stay healthy. Because like you said early on, the dissonance will just eat you up from the inside out.
It does.
Well,
That's
and
true.
I think it's important to add that my nervous breakdown wasn't 100% because of the church, not at all. If I was
Nor was mine.
right, if I was to
Yeah,
ignore some of the,
thanks.
yeah, absolutely. If I was to ignore some of the other life challenges that were going on at that same time in my life, then that wouldn't be fair. The challenge was that the church expected so much from me, no matter what was going on in my personal life. And Barry, as you said earlier, the church was an unhealthy organization from the get-go because it was founded by a con man and a narcissist. And his predecessor, we are all Brighamites because we all were born into the Brigham Young breakoff group from Mormonism. And everybody has their limit. And I remember we had a good friend. She was the bishop's wife for us, Mason, in North Carolina. And she used to say, Sarah has the patience of Job. And now that I'm on the outside of organized religion, the story of Job is awful. The story of Job is God
making
and
it with his nemesis that,
right.
or actually he really was the prosecutor.
Yeah, well, and
Making a bet with him, and the thing about Job that bothered me the worst, is they said, my students would say, because we studied this, or people would say at church, well, look, Job got everything back and more. I said, did he get his 10 children back?
No, not the ones he lost. And for me, I always looked at the story of Job as being like, this is the epitome of divorced parents using their children as a pawn to see what they can get out of each other. Did Job get things back? Did he get his wealth back? Yes. Did he have more children? Yes. Did he get a new wife? Sure. But that doesn't take away the trauma of losing a spouse and losing his children and losing his home. I mean, sure, he got good things later, but what did he lose?
Yeah. Think about where he went. When he got, evidently what he got was some type of a disease that caused big boils. And when the boils would pop, they must have stunk like hell. So where does he go? He goes out to the ash heap. Maybe there's also dung heap there too. and he puts that stuff on him to take that pain away. And yet, so he's, I mean, what it says is he's in deep caca, could be, could have been a dung heap, it could have been the ash heap. But the fact was, he hit bottom.
Yeah. And he was alone. He was completely alone because
and we never
God made a bet.
We never think about people. Someone comes up to a little mother who's just lost a child, or says, "Oh, honey, don't you think God must have really needed him to take him this early?"
Oh, it's the worst thing to say. It's horrible.
And I would think to myself, I don't care. I don't give a shit about that God. I loved him, and that ripping away has caused me damage I'll probably never get over.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that we sometimes say about the gospel. Well, you'll have a lot of pain here, but when you die, you'll be all right. I don't even know if there is another word. I'm kind of like Socrates when he was getting ready to drink the hemlock. They said, "Oh, Socrates, don't drink it. The sun's still out." And he said, I'm 70 years old. I'm old. And they said, "I'm tired." And he said, "I'm not afraid to die." And he said, "If there's a life after this, there's a couple of guys I'd like to see, like Heracles and some of those boys. But if there's not, I'm awfully tired and I could sure use the rest." Yeah. And that's kind of where I finally ended up.
Yeah.
I'm awfully tired and I could sure use the rest.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's interesting that you can find more peace in, like, so you're talking about a child that's lost. You can find more peace in the fact that this was completely random than you can find in the peace that some God took him because he's so good.
Couldn't you? Wouldn't it happen if someone came up and said, "Oh, that's an act of God," and you go, "Fuck God."
Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't you be much happier to just know that it was random than someone you've loved and given your whole life to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You like that?
I would have never thought that possible, but yeah, it's more peaceful to just think, you know what? Life sucks sometimes. I loved him. I miss him, and I'll never be the same. But at least you don't have to think that somebody you're supposed to love did it to you.
Yeah, and they say, "Oh, everything will be better on the other side." Well, shit, I don't even know if there is another side. Right. I've got to go through that pain and trauma right now.
That's a superfluous promise right there.
Yeah. Ooh, big words.
It's pie in the sky, my boy.
Well, and right now we're talking a great deal about mental health crises. And so I just want to put this up on the screen just so that if you are struggling, if you are in a mental health crisis, please dial or text 988. I'm here to tell you that I utilized this actually about, Mason, like 6-7 months ago. I had my father did something. And I triggered. He was not supposed to be communicating me, and I triggered quite a bit from that. And I went from doing really well to not doing well at all. And I spent about, 45 minutes texting the 988 mental health crisis hotline. Now, recognize that when you text them, you have to send them a series of short texts. Like if you end up sending them big, long books worth of texts about what's going on, it won't send for some reason. That's what I encountered. And so if you send them 2 to 3 sentences in multiple texts, they will get it. But you can call this, somebody is right there to talk to. What we have found in the literature is that if you can talk to somebody for at least 11 minutes, we don't know why 11 is the magic number, but 11 minutes is the magic number. It reduces successful suicide substantially. And so I want to just put this as we've talked quite a bit about nervous breakdowns and other mental health crises and feelings of hopelessness that can come at any time in our life for varied reasons, that the mental health crisis hotline 988 is a wonderful resource here in the United States. I don't know, does it go up into Canada? I'm not sure about that. But 988 is a wonderful resource for those of you who need help, and it is completely anonymous. When I signed in, I told them that my name was Shania Twain. And they were good with that. So, and I am not Shania Twain.
I want to share one last thing before we close.
Absolutely.
When I left the church and when I retired from my job, I had left 2 societies where I was somebody.
Yeah.
And about 6 months or 7 months or 8 months later, I started feeling weird and bad. And then I read a little thing, and it just happened to be something I had worried about before, and it triggered. And within 2 days or 3 days, I was so bewrought, so upset. I was with my wife one day, and we had going to see my psychiatrist. And I'd visit my psychiatrist monthly, and my psychiatrist quarterly, and my psychologist monthly. I went to see my psychologist, and I said, "Jer, if you don't get me committed today, I won't be here tomorrow." That's how down I was. And I spent the next 5 months, 4 or 5 months, in the Flagstaff Hospital in their mental health wing. And I had 11 ECTs. And they let me go home, but they said, "Barry, we don't think we can do anything more for you." And all of a sudden, this pain and anguish I was going through said, "Okay, now I'm going home to die." And he prescribed me some pills to take, because I could fake it. And the next morning I said, "Honey, I'm going in to die. I'm going to be sitting in that chair. Do you mind coming and being there while I die?" And I took, I just chugged the bottles. And the next thing I knew, it was nighttime somewhere. And my wife and my granddaughter were with me, and they were staying with me in a hospital room in Flagstaff at the same hospital I'd just left. And when they woke, my wife said, I was lying there and I was unconscious, and she said, "To hell with that. I'm not going to take a rap for him killing himself on my watch." And so she called them, and they brought me back to life. And for the next 2 or 3 years, I had to learn to want to live again. And I had to work my little off, and I did, and it was hard. And one day, that I was any little thing could set my depression going. I could feel a little bit, but any little thing would trigger me. And one day, after some great pain, I started to feel almost like, you remember those little curtains they used to show in movies about the Second World War, the blackout curtains, where they'd just open them up a little bit and a little slit of light would go through. I finally would see a little bit of slit of life. A little bit. And I knew I was starting to heal. I was still sicker than hell, but I knew I was starting to heal. Yeah. So in case anybody listen out there, you're going to have, if you've had trauma, there's probably a good chance you might have it again. But it doesn't always have to be as bad. And the fact that I put myself in a hospital saved my life until someone could help me. And I was hospitalized 3 or 4 times after I came out of the hospital the first time. Yeah. Just trying to make it through the day, through the week. And finally, I had some thoughts. And a guy, one of my doctors challenged me. He wasn't medical. He was a medical doctor, not a mental health doctor, but he just challenged me about my fears. He said, "So if that happens, so what in the hell? What's going to go on, Richins?" And I thought, I don't know. He said, "I worry about getting AIDS." He said, "People get their snot on me or all kinds of stuff on me or spit on me or something like that." He said, I've had myself checked several times as a physician. Scares the hell out of you, Barry. He said, "But that's not going to kill you," because that was one of the little triggers in my mind, And it wasn't from sex. It was, I kissed a woman one time, a friend of mine, and it was just like friend. And then all of a sudden I go, what if she's got, and then it boiled out. And he said, "So what?" And then all of a sudden I started looking at other fears that I had. I go, I could handle that. And I had to toughen myself. Yeah. And I finally decided that no matter what happened to me, I could live through it. And I wasn't going to leave that legacy of dying to my children and grandchildren ever again.
Yeah. One of the best protectors against suicidal ideation is having a reason to live or finding a reason to live.
That's right.
I want to
And that's
say to our
long
listeners, if you are struggling, please reach out for help. Dial 911, dial 988, call a friend, call a loved one who can help you choose to stay. I am grateful every single day that I did not swerve my car. And I am grateful even on the dark days. I am deeply grateful that my children, that I lived for my children because they definitely needed me, especially since Mason really cannot braid Abby's hair.
You ask too
Teasing.
much of us, man, you little brat.
So,
I was going to say, I have been, the last 5 years, all of a sudden I had a renaissance in my head, and I have been studying as if someone had cut my mental throat. I just couldn't get enough in, and I've been reading and reading and studying and learning, and it felt like I came alive again. And
yeah.
I'm so grateful that I came alive and that I got a chance to live these last 5 years,
Yeah.
or these, you know.
Yeah, I love the work of Brene Brown. Brene Brown's Power of Vulnerability presentation that you can get on Audible is probably one of the greatest catalysts for positive change in my life. And her essence is learning how to work through shame and learn how to speak your vulnerability in safe places. So absolutely love that. Mason, do you have any final thoughts before we end today?
I don't think so. I think that it's been good to have this kind of discussion and see some of the things that are helpful for us to be able to move forward and to recover. And I think that you should close this out because this is your realm.
But what I will end with, number one, Barry, thank you so much for sharing your vulnerability and your story with us today. I think that many of our listeners will be able to connect with the challenges that you've had. I also think it is absolutely vital to hear about the mental health struggles from a male perspective, because our men, while women are allowed to have struggles more in society than our men are right now, and so hearing this from a male perspective really helps to shift the stigma, and gives other people permission to feel their feelings and seek help. I want our listeners to know that no matter what you're going through, you are not alone. You feel alone. That's normal, but you are not alone. There is always somebody, a text or a phone call away. And if you can't identify that person in your life, call the emergency helplines that have been set up and that are funded for you. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you again, Barry, for your insight and your wisdom. It has been wonderful catching up with you and seeing you on this side of Mormonism. I thoroughly enjoyed your classes and being in theater productions with you, and it has been an honor listening to your story today here at Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma. So,
Well, it's been nice for me, and it's been nice to see Mason again. And I always liked Mason and you, and I knew who you were from when you were young. I knew you were headstrong as hell. When I tried to give you advice, about adopting children and stuff like that, and I said she's going to have a battle, and but I also recognized you.
yeah. The little girl that was constantly on guard so nobody could see how much she was hurting inside. Yeah. That's the one.
And that's me, the little boy. Thank you guys so much. And Mace, take good care of yourself. Good luck in that new position. And I'm so impressed that you got your doctorate. And Sarah, I'm so glad that you're working on. And I hope the new child works out for you.
He's a good kid.
Yeah, I like to use Kipling and say, you're braver than I am. Go get in.
So for our listeners, Mason and I just welcomed an 8th child into our home, and we're starting this one at the age of 16, and we're really excited. He's a really good human and just a good kid. So we are very grateful.
Thanks everyone for being here. We love you.
Thank
Okay.
you. We will see you next time. Bye, Barry.
Bye-bye.
Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma is hosted by Sarah and Mason Westbrook. Produced by Daisy Girl Communications, LLC, and Alex Vidalis. Please join our community on Facebook. Music provided by Musa and John Worthy Music.
Shop Plato's Closet tax-free August 2nd through 4th for back-to-school styles. We sell the trendy, gently used styles you need to make a difference in the world and in your wallet for back-to-school shopping. Save up to 70% off regular retail prices by choosing recycled styles. Save even more when you shop tax-free this weekend. Make a change that others can respect and repeat. Shop Plato's Closet in North Charleston and West Ashley this year for your back-to-school looks. Plato's Closet, located in West Ashley on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard and North Charleston on Rivers Avenue.
Chicken tacos should only be trusted to chicken professionals. That's where we come in. Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One comes with pico de gallo and creamy chipotle ranch. And the other comes with bacon, lettuce, tomato, and avocado ranch. Chicken experts since 1990. Chicken taco experts since now. Order yours today in the Zax Rewards app. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.